Dumping can also, like we said, be a form of chemical pollution. You see here that we've got all of these barrels that have been dumped. When they're metal barrels, it's only a matter of time before that metal corrodes and it starts to wear away, and what's inside gets outside. All right, this is, like I said, metal rusts, right? So eventually what's inside is coming out and it's leaking into the ground. And we know, once again, back to our water, that our water is in the ground, so that means those chemicals are leaching into our water supply. All right, pesticides. We use them for insect control, rodent control, fungicides, disinfectants, all right? All these different things are used on the outsides of our plants, but as we spray them, they seep inside the plant. They also end up in the ground and end up going up through the root system of the plants. So, you know, washing your fruit isn't necessarily going to be eliminating everything. So, breaking down that word, pesticide, side meaning to kill. So they're meant to kill all these things, which is great, but do you think they're really safe for everything else? Do you really think that there's something that you want to be putting into your body? So we end up breathing these chemicals in, they seep into the soil, they leak into our water supply, and we eat the foods that are contaminated by them, etc. And really, like I said, these problems that we're constantly trying to find solutions for are ultimately things that we created and we are affected by. All right? Recognizing that we damage our soil. And how crucial is that soil? Because it's where our food comes from. We grow our food in that soil. So taking care of that soil is probably a pretty important topic to consider. So everything is grown from those nutrients, and just the same, the animals that we use also require those plants. That whole entire food chain is somewhat dependent on the soil. So it's important for us to keep that top layer of soil, all right, we refer to it as topsoil, right? That's that dark, rich stuff, because we're looking for it to grow all of our food. So erosion, right, becomes a problem because it wears away that richest stuff. It doesn't wear away the stuff down below, all right? And that topsoil is so rich because of the decaying matter. So, like I talked about in class, the leaves that the trees lose every year aren't just building up in the forest and you're not tromping through, 5 feet of leaves, but instead they're compressed, they're breaking down, they're decaying. Remember those decomposers, so just like it says there, decomposers are helping to break it down, and as it breaks it down, the nutrients are released into the soil, and it becomes that really, really rich topsoil. It's on the topmost layer because that topmost layer is where those decomposing organisms are. They're not deep and down below, right? So we need to anchor that topsoil in place, all right? Deforestation can only encourage erosion. So we're constantly exposing our soil to erosion because we overgraze our livestock, all right? Clear cut our forests, right? We know that's deforestation, all right? Mining, all these things that we do to expose that topsoil. This is just a perfect example of showing some mining and clear cutting, all right? And how we, clear cut a whole entire side of a mountain, or erosion, how we don't have adequate plants to kind of anchor the soil in place, and as it rains, everything just kind of gets flushed away. All right, mudslides, I'm sure you don't want to be that particular person. All right, so we have poor land management practices that are only hurting us. So we need to make sure that we counteract the destruction because that topsoil, those organisms don't break down fast enough, right? Topsoil can't be replaced fast enough because it has to do with decomposition. So it requires organisms to die and decay in order for the soil to be replenished, and we're using it and depleting it much faster than it's being replaced. Another factor that we need to consider is that all these different things affect the organisms in our environment, right? And that affecting those organisms is decreasing our biodiversity. biodiversity, talking about a bio, life or living, diversity, differences, right? So this is really focusing on the variety of living things in an area. That biodiversity depends on a food chain developing much more into a food web and becoming significantly more complex. When you start to eliminate food sources, they need to focus heavily on other organisms, and it throws off the whole entire balance of that particular environment, right? So extinction is a problem for us, and the idea of what we do to our environment is affecting all of the organisms that live there, and all of those different organisms, we may not want to acknowledge it, but they're a part of that balance of the ecosystem, all right? So understanding that a cascade effect is going to occur. So the idea that if rats go extinct, what are the owls going to eat in this case? All right, the owls are going to need to look for a new food source, and when they look for their new food source, they're going to have competition with other species for that new food source. And if there's no rats, who's going to eat the grasshoppers and keep that grasshopper population in control? Is the grasshopper population going to get out of control, and then they're going to be depleting all of these grass for that particular environment? And if they're depleting all of the grass, is there really going to be enough grass to anchor the soil, and is erosion going to become a problem? Everything is dependent on one another in an environment, in the ecosystem. So it's crucial for us to really focus on and take care of what we do, all right? We need to be able to try to prevent extinction from occurring, right? But even if we could do all of these things, even if we could stop all of these different things from happening, we're still the biggest problem. Overpopulation, right? That despite all of these different things that we do in the environment, and as drastic as they are, the world population for humans is a huge problem. The fact that we are completely overpopulated. We require food, water, space, right? We require all of these different things, and the more of us there are, the more we need of these things, and the less there is for everything else on Earth. The less space there is, the more we're encroaching on other organisms' habitats, right? Picture of an amusement park in China, right? You may not even be able to notice it, but there's actually a lazy river right here. You may be able to see some like dots of blue. It's a bit better over here to be able to tell, but there's a lazy river that like goes around this whole entire center pool area. So what does this mean for us? All right. Eventually, we're going to run out of resources. We're going to run out of our drinking water, food. All right. We're going to deplete those natural resources. All right. There's not going to be enough space, and everything that we do is only going to get worse. So that wraps up our lesson on the human impact on the environment. There's plenty more information. However, we're going to leave it at that. If you have any questions, please see me.